They took my phone first. Not gently, like my voice didn't matter anymore. My sister said, "You're overreacting," while standing between me and the door. I tried to speak, but every decision had already been made without me. Then her daughter, the child who had never spoken, looked straight at me and whispered something that made my hands start shaking. Because, if what she said was true, I wasn't supposed to leave that house alive. I stayed where they put me, on the edge of the couch, because moving felt like permission, and permission was the one thing I no longer had. My sister stood near the doorway, blocking it with her shoulder, as if it were accidental, as if she wasn't the final lock. Her husband leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching me the way people watch a problem they hope will solve itself. The house was quiet in that sharp, unnatural way that happens after something is taken from you. My phone sat on the table, face down, close enough to see but far enough to feel unreachable. I told myself to breathe, to keep my voice steady, to remember that this was family. My sister kept repeating that word like it explained everything. "We just need you to calm down," she said. Which was strange because I hadn't raised my voice. When I asked for my phone back, she shook her head without looking at me. That small movement did more damage than shouting would have. It told me the conversation had ended before it began, and I was the only one who didn't know it yet. Her daughter sat on the floor by the coffee table, knees pulled to her chest, fingers tracing invisible shapes on the rug. She was 8 years old, and had never spoken a word. Not to me, not to doctors, not to anyone. I had always been careful around her, afraid of pushing, afraid of expecting something she couldn't give. That night I barely noticed her at first because all my attention was fixed on the adults who were quietly deciding my next move for me. The child was supposed to be background, safe, irrelevant. I asked to leave. I said it plainly. Without drama, the way you ask for something you are sure you're allowed to do. My sister smiled, tight and brief, and said, "Sit down." The words weren't loud, but they landed heavy. I felt something shift inside me then, a recognition I didn't want to name. It was the understanding that I wasn't being invited to stay. I was being kept, when I stood anyway. Her husband moved first, stepping closer, close enough that I could smell coffee on his breath. I sat back down because the room had suddenly decided that standing was a mistake. My sister's voice softened, and that scared me more than her firmness. She talked about misunderstandings, about stress, about how everything would look different once I had rested. None of it explained why my phone was still face down on the table. None of it explained why the front door felt farther away than it had when I arrived. I tried to catch my niece's eye, but she was staring at the floor, shoulders tight. I don't know how long the silence stretched, only that it grew teeth. My sister finally turned toward the child and said her name, telling her to go to her room. The girl didn't move. Her mother repeated it, sharper this time, and still she stayed where she was. That was the first crack in the room, the first thing that didn't go according to plan. The child lifted her head and looked at me. Really looked, as if she had been waiting for the right moment all along. When she spoke, it wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was careful, like she was placing something fragile into my hands. She said my name, the way people say it when they are afraid for you. The sound of it knocked the air out of my chest. My sister froze and her husband's arms dropped to his sides, shock written plainly across his face. The child didn't look at them. She kept her eyes on me and whispered a sentence that rearranged everything I thought I understood. I felt cold, the kind that starts in your spine and spreads outward. I wanted to ask her to repeat it, to explain, to tell me I had heard wrong, but my mouth wouldn't cooperate. My sister laughed then too quickly and said, "She's just repeating things she hears." Her hand shook as she reached for the girl's shoulder. The child flinched away, a small movement that said more than any scream could have. That was when I knew the danger wasn't a misunderstanding. It was deliberate. I asked my sister why her daughter would know that. The question hung in the air, unanswered. Her husband looked at the phone on the table, then at the door, then back at me, as if calculating distances. My sister told me I was upsetting the child and that we should all take a break. The word break sounded like a threat dressed as kindness. I felt the room closing, the edges pressing in, and understood that whatever the child had overheard was not meant to reach me. I stood again, slower this time, keeping my hands where they could see them. My sister stepped aside just enough to pretend she wasn't blocking me. The child scrambled to her feet and grabbed my sleeve, fingers digging in with surprising strength. She shook her head, eyes wide, and whispered another warning, urgent now. My sister shouted her name, all softness gone, and lunged forward. In that moment, with my niece clinging to me and my sister rushing closer, I realized staying calm would not save me, and leaving might already be too late. The house felt suddenly smaller, like it was holding its breath with us. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and uneven, and I wondered how many choices had already been made in rooms I had never entered. The child's grip tightened, her warning unfinished, and I knew whatever she had heard was only the beginning. Somewhere behind my sister's anger, a plan was still moving forward, and I was standing directly in its path, without my phone, without allies, and without time remaining unseen. My sister reached us. Before I could take a full step back, she grabbed her daughter's wrist, not hard enough to bruise, but firm enough to send a clear message. The child let out a small sound, not quite a cry, more like a breath forced out too fast. I reacted without thinking, pulling the girl behind me. That single movement shattered whatever calm my sister had been pretending to maintain. Her face changed, anger slipping through the cracks of control she had worked so hard to keep in place. "Don't touch her like that," I said, and my voice surprised me with its steadiness. I expected shouting in response. What I got instead was silence. Her husband straightened, eyes narrowing, as if he was seeing me clearly for the first time that night. My sister's hand hovered in the air, then dropped slowly to her side. She took a step back, inhaled, and said my name the way people do when they're trying to remind themselves to be patient with someone they've already decided to punish. The child pressed herself against my back, small and shaking, her fingers still twisted into my sleeve. I could feel her breathing, fast and uneven. My sister said we were upsetting her, and that I needed to sit back down. I refused. The refusal felt dangerous, like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. But it also felt necessary. My sister's eyes flicked to her husband, and something passed between them that wasn't meant for me. That unspoken exchange confirmed what my body already knew. This wasn't improvisation. This was rehearsed. I asked again for my phone. Her husband shook his head and said, "Let's not make this worse." The words sounded reasonable, which made them worse. I realized then that they weren't worried about me leaving angry. They were worried about me leaving informed. The child tugged on my sleeve and whispered my name again, her voice barely there, but unmistakably real. I turned slightly so she could see my face and told her it was okay, even though it wasn't. My sister moved toward the table, placing herself between me and the phone. She said we needed to talk things through, like adults. I almost laughed at that. The irony sharp enough to cut. Talking required consent from both sides, and mine had already been revoked. I asked her what her daughter had overheard, keeping my tone careful, neutral, the way you speak when you're trying not to provoke an animal that feels cornered. My sister stiffened, then shrugged, dismissive. "She hears things on television," she said. "You're projecting." The child shook her head violently, her grip tightening until it hurt. She whispered again, louder this time, a fragment of a sentence that made my stomach drop. It included my name and a word that should never be said casually. My sister's husband swore under his breath. That was enough. The reaction came too fast, too honest. It confirmed the truth more clearly than any confession could have. My sister snapped at her daughter to stop lying, her voice sharp, cutting through the room like glass. I told them both to step back. The command surprised even me. My sister laughed again, brittle and humorless, and said I was being dramatic. She said no one was trying to hurt me. I asked why they wouldn't give me my phone then. Her husband answered instead, saying there was no need to involve outsiders in family matters. The word outsiders echoed in my head. It was a boundary line drawn deliberately, and I was standing on the wrong side of it. The child shifted, trying to speak again, and my sister lunged forward, faster this time. I moved instinctively, turning my body to shield the girl. My sister stopped short, breathing hard, eyes wild with frustration. For a split second, the mask slipped completely, and I saw something underneath that made my blood run cold. Not anger, calculation. She took a step back and smoothed her hair, regaining control with visible effort. "We need to calm down," she said, and gestured toward the couch. All of us. I realized then that calm was their goal, because calm made compliance easier. I shook my head. I said I was leaving. Now, her husband blocked the door without touching it, standing close enough to make the point. The room felt smaller again, the walls pressing in as if they were listening. The child pressed her face into my back, muffling a sound that might have been a sob. I thought about running, about pushing past him, about grabbing the phone and bolting for the door. Every option felt equally impossible. My sister spoke softly, explaining that I was confused, that stress had been affecting my judgment, that I should trust her. The words felt rehearsed, practiced, as if she had been waiting for the right moment to deploy them. I wondered how long this had been planned, how many conversations had happened without me. The child whispered one more thing, close to my ear, something about waiting and watching, and a time she wasn't supposed to be awake. The fragment was enough. It painted a picture I didn't want to see, one that suggested this wasn't the first secret she had carried. I realized then that whatever danger I was in, she was in it too, trapped in a house where adults spoke freely when they thought no one was listening. My sister took a step toward us, hands raised in a mockery of peace. "You're scaring her," she said, accusing. I wanted to scream at her that the fear had been there long before I arrived. Instead, I said nothing, because silence felt safer than the wrong word. The tension in the room thickened, stretching toward something inevitable. I could feel a decision approaching. Not mine, but theirs. And I knew that once it was made, there would be no undoing it. The child's grip loosened slightly, her whisper unfinished, and I understood that whatever chance I had to change the outcome was slipping away. Somewhere in the house, a door creaked, a sound that didn't belong to any of us. My sister's eyes flicked toward it, then back to me, and in that moment, I knew we weren't alone in this anymore. Something else had been set in motion, and I had no idea how far it was willing to go. The sound from deeper in the house wasn't loud, but it was deliberate. The kind of noise that tells you someone wants to be heard without announcing themselves. My sister reacted too quickly, her head snapping toward the hallway before she could stop herself. That reaction confirmed what the child had been trying to warn me about. This wasn't just about keeping me quiet. There was someone else involved, someone who wasn't supposed to enter the room yet. I tightened my grip on my niece's hand, and she squeezed back, as if we were silently agreeing not to let go no matter what came next. My sister's husband cleared his throat and said my name, trying to sound calm, reasonable. He told me I was misreading things, that the house made noises all the time, that I was letting my imagination get the better of me. His words came too fast, layered with explanations no one had asked for. I watched his eyes instead of listening, noticed how they kept darting toward the hallway. He was waiting for something, or someone. That waiting made the room feel like a trap that hadn't fully closed yet. I asked who else was in the house. The question landed heavy, dragging silence behind it. My sister laughed, but it was wrong, high and strained. She said no one. Of course no one. Why would there be anyone else? Her daughter shook her head immediately. A sharp, frantic movement. She leaned closer to me and whispered a single word, one I couldn't quite make out, but the fear in her voice was unmistakable. My sister snapped her name again, anger flashing across her face like a warning light. I told them I was done talking. I said I was leaving with my niece, now. The declaration felt reckless, the moment it left my mouth, but it was also the first honest thing I'd said since arriving. My sister stepped forward, her tone dropping. Turning cold, she said I didn't have the right to take her child anywhere. I asked her what right she had to scare her into silence. The accusation hung there, raw and exposed. Her husband shifted his weight, positioning himself more firmly in front of the door. The child tugged at my sleeve again, whispering urgently, fragments spilling out faster now. I caught pieces of it, enough to form a shape of something dark and planned, something she had overheard when she was supposed to be asleep. My stomach turned as I realized she wasn't guessing. She was remembering. My sister noticed my expression change and moved quickly, reaching for her daughter again. This time, I didn't let go. The contact sparked something volatile in the room, tension snapping tight. "Stop," my sister said. Her voice low and dangerous. She accused me of manipulating her child, of putting ideas in her head. I told her that children don't invent fear like that without a reason. Her husband interrupted, saying this wasn't productive, that we needed to reset, to sit down and talk like adults. The word reset echoed strangely, as if he were referring to something more than a conversation. I wondered how many times they had rehearsed this moment, how many variations they had planned for. Another sound came from the hallway, closer this time, a footstep, slow and unhurried. My sister's shoulders stiffened. She shot a look at her husband that was full of warning. He hesitated, then nodded, a subtle agreement passing between them. The child froze, her grip tightening until her fingers hurt my arm. She whispered again, clearer now, and this time I understood enough to feel the blood drain from my face. It was confirmation of intent, not possibility. I demanded my phone again, my voice shaking despite my efforts. My sister's husband said no firmly, and for the first time, he dropped the pretense of politeness. He told me to stop escalating things. The accusation was almost impressive in its audacity. I realized then that they weren't afraid of being exposed. They were confident they could control the situation long enough to make exposure impossible. The thought pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The child started to cry quietly, tears soaking into my sleeve. My sister rounded on her, frustration boiling over, and told her to stop it. The cruelty of that command, delivered to a terrified child, cut through me. I stepped back, trying to put distance between us and the hallway. The room felt smaller with every step, like the walls were inching inward. I could hear my own breathing, loud and uneven, and wondered how it sounded to them. A figure appeared at the end of the hallway, partially obscured by shadow. I couldn't see their face clearly, but the way my sister reacted told me everything I needed to know. She straightened, smoothing her hair, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The performance was automatic, practiced. The child gasped softly and buried her face against me, whispering my name like a plea. I felt a surge of anger then, sharp and burning, pushing through the fear. I asked who that was, pointing toward the hallway. My sister answered too quickly, saying it was nothing, just a misunderstanding. Someone who would leave soon. The person didn't move, didn't speak. The silence around them felt intentional, heavy. My sister's husband shifted closer to me, subtly cutting off my path. I realized with chilling clarity that the door was no longer the immediate threat. The real danger was behind us, already inside the house. The child whispered again, telling me something about promises made and plans discussed when she was meant to be asleep. Her words were fragmented, but the meaning was unmistakable. This had been arranged. I felt a wave of guilt crash over me for every moment. I had dismissed her silence as harmless. For every time I had assumed children were oblivious to adult cruelty. She knew more than she should have, and that knowledge had put both of us in danger. My sister took another step forward, her smile gone, her voice low. She said we needed to stop this before it got out of hand. The irony was suffocating. I could feel the situation tipping, sliding towards something irreversible. The figure in the hallway shifted slightly, and the sound of that movement made my heart pound harder. I understood then that whatever chance I had to leave quietly had already passed. The child's warning echoed in my head, unfinished and urgent, and I knew the next choice I made would change everything. I didn't wait for permission. I moved sideways, guiding my niece toward the narrow space between the couch and the wall, keeping my body angled so I could see both the hallway and my sister at once. My sister noticed immediately and said my name sharply, warning me not to be stupid. Her husband took a step forward, then hesitated, glancing toward the figure behind us as if checking whether he was allowed to intervene yet. That hesitation mattered. It told me there were limits, rules even, and that gave me something to push against before everything finally collapsed completely. The figure stepped fully into the light and I recognized him instantly, which somehow made it worse. He was someone I trusted once, someone who had shared dinners with us and laughed too loudly at harmless jokes. Seeing him there rewrote my understanding of the room. My sister spoke his name casually, like his presence required no explanation, like this was always meant to be. He didn't look at me directly, just nodded toward my sister's husband, confirming something silently. That silent confirmation chilled me deeper than threats ever could, and erased every remaining doubt inside me without mercy now. My niece stiffened when she saw him, fear rippling through her small frame. She whispered again, faster, words tumbling over each other like she was afraid. Time itself was listening. I caught enough to understand she had seen him before, heard him promise things that made no sense to a child. My sister cut her off, voice sharp, accusing her of making stories. The man from the hallway finally spoke, telling my sister to calm down before mistakes happened. His tone carried authority, and everyone obeyed it immediately, including me, despite everything I felt in that terrifying moment alone there. I realized then that my sister wasn't leading this. She was protecting it. That understanding shifted something hard inside me, replacing confusion with focus. I stopped arguing and started observing, noticing how the men deferred to each other and how my sister positioned herself as justification. The child clung to me, shaking, and I knew whatever happened next would define her future too. The room felt suspended, as if waiting for someone to decide when to push the first irreversible action. That waiting felt more dangerous than open violence ever could, because silence hides intentions better than shouting ever does. My sister finally spoke again, suggesting we all take a breath, as if oxygen could undo planning. She asked the man if everything was ready, then stopped herself too late. The slip was small but fatal. I asked, ready for what? My voice steady, despite the fear clawing inside me. No one answered. The child whimpered softly, and the sound broke something fragile in me. I knew then I would not leave quietly, not without exposing whatever they had arranged, even if doing so put us both in danger, because silence would destroy us anyway faster than any threat could. I shifted my stance, putting myself fully between my niece and the others, and announced we were leaving. My sister's husband laughed, short and humorless, saying that wasn't possible. The man from the hallway stepped closer, his presence heavy, explaining this had gone too far already. I asked, far for whom? His eyes flicked to my sister, then away. That answer told me enough. I understood then that my safety was never part of their calculation. That realization sharpened my resolve and stripped away remaining fear, replacing it with cold, deliberate urgency that demanded immediate, risky action from me now. The child whispered one last warning, something about a door and timing, and I felt my pulse spike. I scanned the room, noticing details I had ignored, the angle of furniture, the position of bodies. My sister watched me closely, realizing too late that I had stopped reacting and started planning. She told me to think carefully, her voice edged with threat. I replied that I already was. The words surprised her, and in that hesitation, opportunity briefly appeared. It was small, fragile, but possibly our only chance, and I knew it would vanish quickly if I delayed even seconds. I moved toward the side door without announcing it, pulling my niece with me, heart pounding. My sister shouted. The men reacted, and the room erupted into motion. Hands reached, voices overlapped, and the careful control they had maintained cracked. I felt fingers brush my arm, grabbing fabric, but I twisted free, driven by something fierce and protective. The child stumbled, and I caught her, lifting her briefly as we pushed forward. The door loomed closer, but danger surged behind us. Someone yelled my name again, this time with real panic, and that sound fueled my final push forward hard. I reached the door and yanked it open, cold air rushing in like relief and warning combined. The threshold felt dangerous, as if crossing it would trigger consequences I couldn't predict. My sister screamed behind me, promising this wasn't over, that I would regret it. I didn't answer. I stepped through with my niece pressed to my side, knowing escape was uncertain, and pursuit likely. Behind us, plans unraveled, but ahead waited a different risk entirely, one I would have to face without knowing who truly stood against me, or how far they were willing to go to stop us. The moment we crossed outside, I understood freedom was temporary. I could feel eyes on us, hear movement behind, and sense decisions recalculating rapidly. My niece whispered that it wasn't finished, that someone else knew, and that frightened me more than the shouting. I didn't slow down. I chose a direction without thinking, trusting instinct over logic. Every step carried risk, every breath burned. Whatever truth she had overheard was bigger than that house, and escaping it would demand choices I wasn't ready to make yet, choices that could cost everything we still had, including safety, trust, and family forever. I didn't stop running until my lungs burned and the child's breathing hitched hard against my shoulder. We ducked behind a row of parked cars at the edge of the street, the cold metal biting into my palm as I steadied myself. The house sat behind us, dark and ordinary from the outside, which made everything inside it feel unreal. I crouched down and set my niece on her feet, keeping a hand on her shoulder so she wouldn't bolt. She looked up at me, eyes wide, lips trembling, and for the first time since she spoke, she tried to say more than a warning. Her words came out broken, rushed, like pieces of glass she was afraid to hold too tightly. She talked about hearing grown-ups whisper when they thought she was asleep, about names and plans, and a promise that someone would take care of it. I asked her what it meant, already dreading the answer. She shook her head, tears spilling over, and said she didn't know, only that my name kept coming up, and that it was always followed by quiet laughter. The image of that laughter settled deep in my chest, heavy and corrosive. I glanced back toward the house, half expecting someone to burst through the door and drag us back. Nothing happened. The stillness was worse. It told me they were regrouping, adjusting, deciding how to proceed now that their clean plan had fractured. I realized then that escaping the house didn't end the danger, it just moved it into the open, where consequences would be messier. I needed help, but help meant involving people they clearly didn't want involved, and without my phone, my options felt dangerously limited. I knelt in front of my niece and told her we needed to find somewhere safe. She nodded, wiping her face with her sleeve, and said something that made my stomach twist. She told me her mother had said people wouldn't believe her because she had never talked before. That sentence explained everything. It explained the confidence, the rehearsed calm, the way my sister dismissed every word her daughter tried to say. Silence had been turned into a weapon, one they believed would protect them completely. We moved again, staying close to the shadows, my mind racing through possibilities. I considered neighbors, friends, anyone who might open a door without asking too many questions. Every option carried risk. I didn't know who else might already be involved, how far this reached beyond that house. The child tugged at my sleeve and whispered that there was someone else, someone who visited sometimes, and told her not to talk about what she heard. My chest tightened. The circle was wider than I had thought, and that made every familiar face feel suddenly uncertain. We reached a small park nearby, deserted and dim, the kind of place people overlook. I guided her onto a bench and sat close, scanning the surroundings. My thoughts kept returning to my phone, face down on the table, the one thing that could cut through their control. I realized then that leaving it behind might have been exactly what they were counting on. Without it, I was isolated, forced to rely on instinct, and the testimony of a child they assumed no one would trust. My niece spoke again more clearly now, the fear still there but steadier. She said she had tried to tell her mother once quietly, and had been told to forget it, that it was adult business. The dismissal had been gentle, almost loving, which somehow made it worse. It taught her that silence was safer than truth. I felt a surge of anger then, not just at my sister but at myself for never noticing the weight that silence carried for her daughter. I told my niece she had done the right thing, that speaking had mattered, that it had changed everything. She looked at me like she wasn't sure she believed that yet. I didn't blame her. From her perspective, speaking had only made things scarier, more chaotic. I promised her we wouldn't go back, that I wouldn't let anyone make her quiet again. The promise felt enormous, heavy with responsibility, but it also felt necessary, a line drawn that I couldn't step back from now. A car passed slowly at the edge of the park, headlights sweeping over us. I froze, heart hammering until it moved on. The adrenaline crash left me shaky. I knew we couldn't stay exposed like this for long. I needed to make a decision, and quickly. I thought about walking to a nearby store asking to use a phone, but the idea of explaining everything out loud, in public with my niece listening, felt dangerous in a different way. I didn't know what would happen once words left my mouth. My niece leaned closer and whispered something that shifted my thinking. She said there were papers, kept somewhere high, that her mother said were important, and not to be touched. She didn't know what they were, only that adults argued about them when they thought she was asleep. The mention of papers made my pulse jump. Plans often left traces, physical ones, and those traces could be proof. The thought was both terrifying and empowering. It meant there was something tangible, something beyond a frightened child's testimony. I weighed the risk of going back against the risk of staying away. Both felt dangerous, but one offered the possibility of answers. I realized then that running indefinitely wasn't an option. If they were willing to go this far to keep me quiet, they wouldn't simply let it go. I needed leverage, something that shifted the balance, something that made their rehearsed confidence crack. The papers my niece mentioned might be that something, if I could get to them without walking straight into a trap. I told my niece we might have to do something hard, something that scared me too. She nodded slowly, understanding more than she should have to at her age. The trust in her eyes felt like a weight and a gift at the same time. I stood, scanning the street again, mind racing with routes and contingencies. The night felt different now, charged with consequence. Every choice from this point forward would echo, and I could feel the story tightening around us, demanding a direction. As we moved away from the park, I felt the danger shift again, less immediate but more calculated. Somewhere behind us, plans were being rewritten, roles reassigned. I knew they would not stop. Not yet. My niece squeezed my hand, whispering that she was scared. I told her I was too, and that honesty seemed to calm her more than false reassurance ever could. Whatever came next would test that promise I made, and I understood with stark clarity that there would be no simple escape, only confrontation waiting ahead, sharp and unavoidable. We didn't head straight back toward the house. That would have been too obvious, too expected. Instead, I led my niece through a longer route, cutting across streets I knew well enough to trust in the dark. I kept checking reflections in windows and car mirrors, not because I saw someone following us, but because I expected to. The absence of pursuit felt intentional, like the pause before something recalculated. My niece stayed close, her small hand wrapped tightly around mine, her silence now different from before, no longer empty, but heavy with words waiting for the right moment. We stopped behind a closed storefront where the lights were off, and the street noise thinned. I crouched down so we were eye level, and I asked her to tell me everything she remembered about the papers. Not guesses, not feelings, just what she had seen and heard. She swallowed hard and focused, the way children do when they sense that accuracy matters. She said they were kept in a high cabinet above the fridge, inside a thin brown folder. She remembered because her mother once stood on a chair to reach it and told her not to look. I asked, who argued about them? She hesitated, then said the man from the hallway had been there, and sometimes another voice on speakerphone, a man she didn't know, who spoke slowly and laughed at the wrong times. That detail stuck with me. Speakerphones were used when people didn't want to be alone with their words. I asked what they argued about, and she said my name again. Always my name, followed by phrases she didn't understand. One of them sounded like clean, another like no mess. I felt my stomach tighten, a slow, cold knot forming. I kept my face calm for her sake, and asked one more thing, something that scared me to ask. I asked if she had ever heard dates or times mentioned. She shook her head quickly and said no, but then added that her mother once said, "It has to be soon," and told her husband to stop pacing. The word soon felt like a countdown without numbers, and I hated how close it felt to the present. We couldn't stay where we were. I made a decision that felt reckless and necessary at the same time. We were going back, but not to confront them. Not yet. We were going back to retrieve proof, quietly, while they believed we were still running. I told my niece exactly what I was planning to do and asked her if she could help me without putting herself in danger. She nodded, eyes serious, and said she could tell me where to step so the floor wouldn't creak near the kitchen. The trust in that moment cut through me. This wasn't a game or a story to her. This was survival. We moved again. Slower now, careful to stay unseen. As we approached the block, I noticed lights on in neighboring houses, ordinary signs of life that felt surreal against what we were walking back into. The house itself looked unchanged, quiet, the side door closed. I listened hard before approaching, trying to catch voices, movement, anything that suggested they were waiting. We slipped around back, keeping to the shadows. The door was locked, as expected. I tested it anyway, then crouched beside my niece and asked her to show me the kitchen window she sometimes watched birds from. She pointed, and we moved toward it. I lifted her gently so she could see inside. She whispered that no one was there. I peeked myself and saw an empty kitchen. Lights off, nothing out of place. That emptiness felt staged, like a room cleared before a performance. I eased the window open just enough to climb through, my heart hammering in my ears. The house smelled the same, familiar and wrong all at once. I helped my niece in and told her to stay close. Every sound felt amplified, each step a risk. We moved slowly toward the kitchen, and she guided me around a loose tile near the sink. I followed her lead without question. In that moment she was the expert, and I trusted her completely. The cabinet above the fridge was exactly where she said it would be. I reached for it, hands shaking, and froze when I heard a sound from the hallway. Footsteps, measured, unhurried. I pulled back, pressing us both against the counter. My niece's breathing hitched, and I felt her fear spike through my own. The footsteps paused, then continued past the kitchen, heading toward the front of the house. I waited until they faded before moving again. I climbed onto the chair. My niece dragged over, heart pounding, and reached into the cabinet. My fingers brushed the edge of the folder immediately, like it wanted to be found. I pulled it down carefully and opened it just enough to see inside. The contents made my vision blur, The papers, official looking, with my name repeated in places that made no sense. There were signatures I recognized, and others I didn't. There was language about decisions being made on my behalf, about incapacity, about urgency. I didn't have time to read everything. I took photos with my niece's help, using the small tablet she carried in her backpack, something I hadn't even known she had. My sister's voice echoed faintly from the front of the house. Then, sharp and irritated, she was talking to someone, complaining about delays. The sound jolted me back into motion. I tucked the folder back where it belonged, every instinct screaming at me to run. We moved toward the window again, faster now but still careful. As I helped my niece climb out, a floorboard creaked behind us, loud and unmistakable. I froze, heart slamming against my ribs. A voice called my name from the hallway, calm and curious, like they already knew the answer. I pushed my niece through the window and followed, landing hard on the ground outside. We ran without looking back, the house suddenly alive with noise behind us. I didn't slow until we were blocks away, breath tearing from my chest. My niece clutched the tablet like it was a lifeline. I knew then that whatever was in those papers had shifted the balance. They would realize it soon, and when they did, the game would change again. The danger wasn't over. It had just evolved, and this time it would come at us openly with nothing left to hide. We didn't stop until the streetlights thinned and the houses grew unfamiliar, the kind of neighborhood where people noticed strangers but didn't ask questions right away. My legs felt unsteady, adrenaline wearing off in uneven waves, but I kept moving because stopping felt like surrender. My niece stayed close, clutching the tablet to her chest, as if it might vanish if she loosened her grip. Every passing car made us flinch. I knew it was only a matter of time before they realized what we had taken, before the calm calculation turned into something louder and far more dangerous. I guided us into a small all-night diner, the kind that smelled like coffee and disinfectant, and never quite slept. The bell above the door chimed when we entered, and the sound felt almost too normal, too loud after the silence we'd been running through. A waitress glanced up, smiled automatically, then paused when she saw my niece's face streaked with tears. I asked for a booth near the back and said we needed a minute. She nodded, curiosity flickering in her eyes, but staying mercifully contained. We slid into the booth, and I positioned myself so I could see the door without being obvious about it. My niece set the tablet on the table between us. Hands shaking, I told her to take a breath, just one, and she tried, her chest rising unevenly. I took the tablet and looked through the photos quickly, forcing myself not to spiral. The words on the screen were enough to make my throat tighten. Legal language. Authority granted. Decisions outlined as if my life were a problem to be solved efficiently. I realized then why they were so calm about keeping me there. According to those papers, they didn't see themselves as doing anything wrong. They had already justified it. There were references to my supposed instability, concerns about my judgment, and recommendations made without my knowledge. I recognized my sister's handwriting in the margins, neat and deliberate. Seeing it there hurt more than the fear ever had. This wasn't just betrayal. It was preparation, layered and patient. My niece watched my face closely, reading reactions she had learned to decode in silence. I told her she had been brave, that what she did mattered more than she could understand yet. She nodded, but her eyes stayed anxious. She asked if her mother would be angry. I told her the truth, gently. I said yes, but that anger didn't make her wrong. The distinction seemed new to her, and I saw it settle slowly like something she would carry with her long after tonight. The waitress returned with water and menus. I ordered coffee. I knew I wouldn't drink and asked for pancakes for my niece, hoping the normalcy might anchor her. When the waitress left, I leaned in and whispered that we couldn't stay long. I needed to make calls, real ones, and I couldn't do that safely from my sister's phone or anywhere they expected me to be. My niece nodded and said she knew a place, A friend's house her mother didn't like, where people asked too many questions. That made it perfect. As if summoned by the thought, my phone buzzed in my memory, a phantom vibration that reminded me how exposed we still were. I scanned the diner again and caught a glimpse of a familiar car slowing outside, then driving on. It might have meant nothing. It might have meant everything. I paid quickly in cash and gathered my niece, keeping my movements calm and unhurried. Panic would only make us memorable, and memorability was dangerous. We left through the side door and cut through an alley, then another street, following my niece's directions. I trusted her instincts now without hesitation. She led me to a modest house with a porch light on and a faded welcome mat. She said her friend's grandmother lived there, that she liked her because she listened. I knocked, heart pounding, already rehearsing what I would say if the door opened or if it didn't. After a pause that stretched too long, the door creaked open. The woman who answered looked tired but alert, her eyes sharp behind thick glasses. She took one look at us and stepped aside without asking for explanations. Inside, the house was warm and cluttered with life. Photos on the walls, the low hum of a television in another room. I felt something inside me loosen for the first time since this began. Safety wasn't guaranteed, but it was closer than it had been in hours. I explained what I could, carefully choosing words that didn't overwhelm my niece. The woman listened without interrupting, her expression serious. When I mentioned legal papers and decisions being made without my consent, her jaw tightened. She told me she used to work as a clerk and knew enough to know when something smelled wrong. She offered me her phone and said we could stay the night if needed. The relief was so sudden it made my eyes sting. I made calls then to a lawyer friend I hadn't spoken to in years, to someone I trusted implicitly. I didn't give details yet, only enough to ask for help and urgency. Each conversation grounded me a little more. My niece sat at the table, eating pancakes slowly, watching me with a cautious hope that hurt to see. I promised her quietly that we wouldn't go back there, not without protection and witnesses. The phone rang again. An unfamiliar number. I didn't answer it. A message followed. My sister's voice tight and controlled, asking where I was, saying we needed to talk. I deleted it without responding. The silence on my end felt like a line drawn. I knew it wouldn't stop her, but it shifted the terms. She no longer controlled the narrative alone. That mattered more than she would admit. As the night wore on, the adrenaline faded into exhaustion. My niece leaned against me, finally asleep, her breathing slow and steady. I watched her and thought about the cost of speaking, the way her first words had been warnings meant to protect me. That kind of courage deserved more than gratitude. It deserved action. I looked again at the photos on the tablet, at the signatures and assumptions, and felt something harden into resolve. I understood then that this wasn't just about escaping danger. It was about confronting a system that had already decided I was expendable. My sister hadn't acted alone, and whatever network she thought would protect her had underestimated one thing. She hadn't counted on a child breaking silence at the worst possible moment. That break had cracked everything open, and now the consequences were moving toward us fast. Outside, a car idled briefly before driving on. I watched until the sound faded, then turned back to my niece, adjusting the blanket around her shoulders. I knew the next steps would be complicated, messy and public in ways my sister had tried to avoid. There would be no quiet resolution, no private apology that made this disappear. The danger hadn't passed. It had transformed, becoming something that demanded exposure. I sat there in the dim kitchen, phone finally in my hand, and felt the weight of what was coming settle in. Whatever they had planned for me was already unraveling, thread by thread. But I also knew retaliation was inevitable. They wouldn't stop simply because I had proof. The story was far from over, and the next move would determine whether this ended with truth or with something far worse waiting just out of sight. Morning light crept through the thin curtains before I was ready to face it, pale and intrusive, like it didn't understand what kind of night it was interrupting. I hadn't slept. I sat at the small kitchen table, phone in hand, replaying conversations, and rereading the images on the tablet until the words blurred. My niece slept curled on the couch behind me, her face peaceful for the first time since she spoke. That peace felt fragile, something I was afraid to disturb by standing up too loudly. The lawyer called back while the kettle boiled. His voice was calm, professional, and edged with concern as soon as I explained more. He asked precise questions, the kind that made it clear he understood the gravity of what I was describing. When I mentioned documents referencing incapacity and urgency, he went quiet for a moment. Then he told me not to go anywhere alone, not to speak to my sister without representation, and to preserve everything exactly as it was. Hearing those instructions confirmed something I had been avoiding. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was a legal fight with real consequences. I thanked him and ended the call, my hands trembling slightly. The grandmother watched me from across the room, saying nothing, but her presence was steady, grounding. She told me we would eat breakfast, and then decide next steps. The simplicity of that plan helped more than any reassurance could have. When my niece woke up, she looked around, momentarily confused, then relaxed when she saw me. She asked if we were safe. I told her we were safer than before, which was the truth, even if it wasn't comforting enough. My phone buzzed again, this time with multiple missed calls and messages. I didn't open them immediately. I already knew their tone would be controlled, concerned, and manipulative. When I finally did, I wasn't surprised. My sister wrote that she was worried, that I was scaring her daughter, that we needed to clear things up before things got worse. The phrasing was careful, defensive. Not once did she ask if we were okay. That absence spoke louder than any accusation. Another message followed from an unknown number. It was brief and unsettlingly polite, suggesting we talk privately and resolve misunderstandings. No name, no explanation, just an expectation of access. I showed it to the grandmother, who frowned and told me not to respond. She said, "People who wanted to help didn't hide behind unfamiliar numbers." I blocked it without hesitation, feeling a strange mix of empowerment and dread. Each blocked call felt like resistance. Each unanswered message felt like escalation. Mid-morning brought a knock at the door. My heart jumped into my throat before I could stop it. The grandmother checked through the window and relaxed slightly, saying it was a neighbor. Still, the jolt lingered. I realized then how deeply the fear had settled into my body, how every unexpected sound now carried threat. My niece noticed too, her eyes tracking every movement. I reminded myself that part of keeping her safe meant modeling calm, even when I didn't feel it. The lawyer called again, this time with instructions to bring the tablet and any notes to his office later that day. He said he would arrange for someone to be present if my sister tried to intervene. That detail sent a chill through me. The fact that intervention was a consideration told me just how serious this had become. I agreed, setting a time, and hung up with a sense of inevitability pressing down on me. This confrontation couldn't be delayed much longer. Before we left, my niece pulled me aside and whispered something that tightened my chest. She said her mother would be very angry that she talked, that she might say terrible things. I knelt and looked her in the eye, telling her that adults sometimes say things when they're losing control, and that those words don't decide the truth. She nodded, absorbing it slowly. I could see the conflict inside her, love tangled with fear, loyalty bruised but not broken. I hated that she had to navigate that at all. The drive to the lawyer's office felt surreal. Streets moved past us like nothing had changed, like this wasn't the day my understanding of family permanently shifted. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see a familiar car trailing us. My niece sat quietly, tablet secured in her backpack, the weight of it symbolic and real. When we arrived, the lawyer met us at the door himself, ushering us inside with efficiency that felt protective. The meeting was intense but validating. He confirmed what I had feared. The documents suggested an attempt to establish control over my decisions under the guise of concern. The urgency language was particularly troubling. He told me that without my knowledge or consent, steps had been taken that could have severely limited my autonomy. Hearing it framed so clearly made my stomach churn. This hadn't been hypothetical. It had been imminent. He asked my niece a few gentle questions, careful not to overwhelm her. She answered quietly but clearly, her words steady now that she was being listened to without dismissal. I watched her speak, the transformation striking. This was the same child who had been dismissed as silent, unreliable. Now, in a room full of adults paying attention, her voice carried weight. The lawyer thanked her sincerely, and I saw something change in her expression, a flicker of pride breaking through fear. When we left the office, my phone rang again. This time it was my sister. Against my better judgment, I answered, putting it on speaker with the lawyer's consent, still fresh in my mind. My sister's voice was strained, accusing, layered with false concern. She said I was overreacting, that I was hurting her daughter, that we could fix this quietly. I told her I had legal representation now. The silence that followed was long and revealing. She recovered quickly, warning me that making this public would destroy the family. I replied that the family had already been damaged the moment plans were made without my consent. She denied everything, then contradicted herself within the same breath. I ended the call before she could regroup. My hands shook afterward, but my resolve didn't. Whatever came next, it would not happen in the dark. By the time we returned to the grandmother's house, the messages had shifted in tone. No more gentle concern. Now there were hints of consequences, of reputations ruined, of things I didn't understand. I showed them to the lawyer via text, who responded with instructions to save everything and say nothing. The shift confirmed what I already suspected. Pressure was replacing persuasion, and that meant they were running out of quiet options. That night, as my niece slept again, I sat alone and thought about the cost of what I was doing. There would be fallout. Relationships would fracture beyond repair. But there was no version of this where silence led to safety anymore. My sister had made choices that couldn't be undone by apologies. The child had spoken, and the truth had entered motion. I understood then that the next phase would be the most dangerous yet, not because of immediate threats, but because exposure changes people. Those who feel cornered often strike hardest when they believe they are losing everything. I checked the locks, turned off the lights, and sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the quiet. Somewhere, plans were collapsing and new ones were forming just as quickly. I knew retaliation was coming, not loud and obvious, but strategic and personal. The calm before it felt heavy, unnatural. As I finally lay down, sleep distant and uneasy, one thought repeated itself with brutal clarity. Speaking had saved my life once already. The next time danger came, silence would not. The retaliation didn't arrive the way I expected. There was no dramatic confrontation, no sudden knock at the door in the middle of the night. Instead, it came quietly, methodically, in ways designed to make me doubt myself. The first sign was a message forwarded to me by a distant relative, asking if I was okay and whether the rumors were true. Rumors. The word settled uneasily in my chest. I realized then that my sister had shifted strategies. If she couldn't control me directly, she would control the story around me. By the time I checked my voicemail, there were several messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Some were concerned, others politely distant. A few carried thinly veiled judgment. My sister had been busy. She framed everything as worry, as love stretched thin by my supposed instability. She never mentioned the papers, never mentioned her daughter's words. She didn't have to. A silence, carefully placed, did the work for her. It was the same silence she had relied on for years, now repurposed against me. The lawyer warned me this would happen. He called it narrative pressure, the attempt to isolate without touching. He told me not to respond, not yet, and to let him handle communication going forward. Following that advice felt unnatural. Every instinct I had wanted to defend myself immediately, to correct every lie. But I understood the trap. Reacting emotionally would only reinforce the image she was trying to build. So I stayed quiet, documenting everything, even as the weight of it pressed harder each hour. My niece sensed the shift before I explained it. She asked why people were suddenly calling, why faces on video calls looked strange when they saw her. I told her some adults get scared when the truth doesn't match the story they've been telling themselves. She absorbed that quietly, then asked if it was her fault. The question hurt more than anything else had. I told her firmly that it wasn't, that speaking had protected us both. I repeated it until I saw her believe it. At least a little. The legal process moved faster than I expected. The urgency language in the documents worked against my sister now, highlighting intent rather than care. Meetings followed, careful and exhausting, where professionals spoke in measured tones about autonomy, consent, and risk. Each time my niece spoke, people listened, not with disbelief, not with dismissal, but with focus. Watching that happen reshaped something inside me. Her voice, once ignored, was now changing outcomes. The confrontation I dreaded finally came, not in person but across a table in a room that smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant. My sister arrived composed, dressed carefully, carrying herself like someone confident the truth would favor her. When she saw me, something flickered across her face, irritation perhaps, or surprise that I hadn't folded. She avoided looking at her daughter. That avoidance spoke volumes. When the questions began, her answers were smooth, practiced, until they weren't. The cracks appeared slowly. Inconsistencies, timelines that didn't align, explanations that required too many assumptions. When the documents were placed on the table, her composure tightened. She tried to reframe them as precautions, as concern taken too far, but the language betrayed her. Decisions made without consultation, authority outlined in advance, urgency that suggested an endpoint she couldn't explain away. The room grew quieter with each clarification. My niece was asked, gently, if she wanted to say anything. She hesitated, then spoke, not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. She described hearing voices when she was supposed to be asleep, her name used as justification for plans she didn't understand. She described being told not to talk, not because she was confused, but because adults didn't want questions. The simplicity of her words cut through every polished excuse. My sister stared at the table. For the first time, she had nothing prepared. The outcome didn't arrive as a single dramatic verdict. It came as boundaries, restrictions, oversight, decisions removed from my sister's hands, protections put in place. The danger didn't vanish, but it was contained, watched, constrained by light. When we left that room, my legs felt weak, the adrenaline finally draining. My sister didn't follow us. She didn't say goodbye. The distance felt final, heavy with everything unsaid. Life didn't snap back to normal after that. It reshaped itself slowly, unevenly. Trust became something I examined carefully, instead of assuming. Family gatherings changed, some disappearing entirely. I grieved that loss quietly, allowing myself to feel it without romanticizing what had been broken. At the same time, something else grew stronger, a sense of clarity, of self-possession. I hadn't realized I was missing before all of this began. My niece stayed with me. The arrangement was temporary at first, then extended, then simply accepted. She spoke more now, not constantly, not suddenly transformed, but deliberately, choosing when words mattered. We talked about fear, about secrets, about how silence can protect or harm depending on who controls it. I watched her confidence build in small, meaningful ways, and I knew that whatever scars this left, it also gave her something powerful, the knowledge that her voice could stop something dangerous. There were moments when the weight of it all threatened to pull me under. Nights when I replayed everything, wondering if there had been an earlier sign I missed, a moment I could have intervened sooner. I learned to sit with that regret without letting it rewrite the truth. Responsibility belonged where it belonged. Carrying it all would only teach my niece the wrong lesson. Survival, I realized, wasn't just about escaping harm. It was about refusing to inherit blame that was never yours. The messages eventually slowed. The rumors lost momentum when they weren't fed. People who mattered asked questions. People who didn't faded away. I stopped measuring my safety by how quiet things were, and started measuring it by how honest they could be. That shift changed everything. Silence was no longer my goal. Transparency was. Sometimes when the house is quiet, my niece will sit beside me and ask if I was scared that night. I tell her the truth. I tell her I was terrified. I also tell her that fear didn't decide what happened next. Speaking did, listening did, acting did. She nods, thoughtful, carrying those lessons forward in her own way. Looking back, I understand now why her first words were warnings. She had been watching longer than anyone realized, absorbing truths adults assumed were invisible to her. When she finally spoke, it wasn't to announce herself, it was to intervene, to interrupt something already in motion. That interruption saved my life in the most literal sense, but it also saved something less visible and just as important. It saved my understanding of power, of family, what it means to protect someone without controlling them. The danger didn't end the moment. We escaped the house. It ended when the truth was no longer contained by silence. That lesson stays with me, sharp and clear. If I had ignored her, if I had stayed quiet, if I had believed that peace meant compliance, none of this would have ended the same way. Sometimes survival doesn't look like running. Sometimes it looks like standing still long enough to listen to the smallest voice in the room, even when everyone else is trying to drown it out.